tonight's share to the memories of Harav Avraham Yaakov ben Harav Shimon, Zichrono Livracha, on his yortzeit, and also to the very sudden tragic passing today of Erwin Goldstein of Renana, who is known to many people and unfortunately had been in the hospital, but unexpectedly passed away. So to both of them, their neshamot should have an aliyah, and the learning will be towards that end. Okay, we are going to explore Parshat Vayera. It's a very, very important and kind of watershed Parsha. There are a few of those in the Torah. They're all important, but Vayera is really an amazing Parsha. I have a special affinity to it because it was the bar mitzvah parsha of Ari, Hashem Yikom Damo, and I had the pleasure of teaching it to him. And as we'll see, I'm only going to take two topics to try to explore in the next half hour. The first one is something that has, I think, both of these ideas really have important messages for us. The first idea, before I get to the topic that I entitled this year, but we see from the very beginning that of this parsha that there is a very, very concentrated or clearly indicated emphasis on speed. You see that in the encounter of Avraham with the Melachim. Although he refers to them as Anashim, Rashi says that he knew clearly they were angels. But in any case, that's a whole other subject, why it calls them Anashim, which I won't go into, maybe next time. But when you look at the Psukim, you see this theme repeated over and over. He sees them, of course, and Vayaratz likratam. He runs to greet them, mipetach ohel. And then when it's time to give them something to eat, he encourages them to stay. And then the pasuk says, Vayemaher Avraham. Avraham hurries, haohela el Sarah. Vayomer, he says to Sarah, Mahari, shlosh se'im kemach solet. We wouldn't think that Sarah would be lax in doing this, but Avraham emphasizes, do it quickly. Ve'el habakar ratz Avraham. And Avraham runs to the cattle. And Vayitein el hanar, he prepares this meal. Vayimaher lasototo. So the Torah is telling us 4 or 5 different times within the space of these 5-6 psukim to hurry, to do this in a rushed fashion. What exactly is the emphasis, or what exactly is the point of this idea of doing it quickly? Before we answer, or to perhaps add to the question before we answer it, we see a similar idea by matzah on Pesach. Matzah on Pesach, we are told, has to be done quickly. We know that it's always a rush job, 18 minutes or less in order to prepare matzah. If you go too long, then you lose the whole mitzvah, right? This is the classic comparison of the word matzot to mitzvot, that when you have the chance to do a mitzvah, al tich mitzu, don't let it go sour, don't delay, do it quickly. And we see this by a lot of different mitzvot. We say zrizi makdimim, those who are really careful get up early and they do a mitzvah right away at the first opportunity. It's a little bit different than when you're preparing a gourmet meal and you let it simmer and you take your time. Here we don't take time, we do it quickly. But on Pesach, this is particularly perplexing because although we are told that we had to do it quickly because we were leaving Mitzrayim and we didn't have time for the dough to rise. We were leaving, the Torah says, b'chipazon, in a hurry. This is strange because we were told about the Yetziat Mitzrayim and the mitzvah of matzah already at least 2 weeks earlier. In the section, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, this shall be the first month to you. When we declared Nisan, restarting our calendar with Nisan as the first of the months, and there we were told, you will be baking the matzah, and here's how to do it. Well, they had 15 days. This was Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and Pesach comes out on the 15th of Nisan. By the way, not the 14th, as many people mistakenly think. Pesach is on the 15th. And so they had 2 weeks. So they had plenty of time to bake all the bread and croissants and rolls, lachmaniot, you name it. And yet they were told that it had to be done quickly. So the answer, I think, to this and the idea of Abraham's, how Abraham dealt with the angels, amounts to the same idea, that speed, doing something quickly, represents excitement, represents passion, represents joy. When you win the lottery, you don't put the ticket away for a month or two, you run to redeem it. When you get that present you've been waiting for your birthday, you tear open the box and the wrapping. You don't put it aside and say, well, when I have a chance, I'll get to it. The things which give you joy and the things which are really important to you, you do quickly. Now, you might delay a dental appointment. I hope no dentist will take any offense. It's not something you're necessarily looking forward to. When you're looking forward to something, you do it quickly. Avraham, the first Jew, and by the way, although it doesn't say so explicitly, this meal was being prepared on Pesach, so it lends itself to connect it to Pesach. Later on, we'll see Lot, by the way, it does say there that he's preparing, Rashi says there, and he's preparing for Pesach, and he is the first one to bake, it says matzot. He's the first one to bake matzot according to the text, but we're told that this is what Abraham and Sarah are doing as well. So Abraham, the first Jew, is trying to teach us a lesson already about one of the first mitzvot in the first month of Nisan, and that is have a sense of excitement and passion about performing the mitzvot. Don't do them lackadaisically. Don't look upon them as a drudgery and something that you want to put off until tomorrow. Doing something quickly is the type of attitude that we should have towards doing mitzvot if we want to get the most out of it, and if we want to express to Hashem that this is something we look forward to. It is not something that is forced upon us. Abraham is always trying to teach us, just as Hashem said, Lech lecha, as we talked about, for your own good, something which helps you, which is for your own good. You tend to do it with a good attitude and quickly, with excitement and with hitlavut. And that is the way we should perform all mitzvot. So that I believe, and that's the idea of the matzah. Yes, we had time to bake the matzah, but we were told specifically to do it quickly to represent this idea that when Hashem said, let's go, we left in a hurry because we were so excited and had such zeal to follow Hashem in the way that we're supposed to perform all the mitzvot with that same kind of enthusiasm. So that's the first point that I want to touch upon. Now let's talk about this other idea, two faces have I, the split personality of Abraham. Because as we look through the story of Abraham, we really, in a sense, see two different kinds of people. On the one hand, and Abraham is, in a sense, taking diametrically opposed postures. we see that he argues passionately for Sodom. Sodom is considered to be the most, the original sin city, a city so bad that although Hashem had said he wouldn't destroy the world, by the way, some people interpret that not only by flood, but he really meant I won't destroy the world in general. But some cities need to be destroyed. Sodom and Amorah were those two cities that had to be destroyed. And yet, Avraham gets up, he argues passionately with God, he engages in this masau matan, in this back and forth of negotiating to try to save Sodom. And yet, in the classic question, when it comes to his own son and the Akedah being ordered to bring Yitzchak for an offering, he's very meek. He doesn't protest. And any protests he may do are very subdued and veiled. Rashi brings this famous medrash that says that he argued with Hashem by saying, take your son. And then he said, well, I have two sons. I love both sons, etc., until Hashem finally has to add the words Yitzchak. That's why the pasuk could have said, take your son, but no, Abraham tries to maybe look for a loophole until Hashem specifies, no, I mean Yitzchak. But it's a very veiled argument. So too, he says to Eliezer and Yishmael, "V'nishtachaveh v'nashuv alechem," we will return to you. And we had a long discussion. If you heard the share that we did on Avraham, the Akedah, and the Mona Lisa, that share, which is, you can, by the way, all of these are on YouTube from just on the Ohel Ari website. If you missed the share, just go Google Ohel Ari and you can go on the website and the YouTubes are there. So I'm not going to go into the Akedah. We went into there in great depth. But here, again, subtly he may be saying, we're coming back. We're not going to go through with this. But it's not the kind of passionate and very direct argument that Abraham has with God about Sodom. By the way, I would say the same thing is true in terms of the story with Yishmael. Sarah wants to banish Yishmael. Clearly, Abraham is against that because the pasuk tells us that he was very disturbed by it. But we don't see him arguing with Sarah. We don't see him going back and forth and giving all the reasons why Yishmael should stay. He's very meek about that. He submits. Now, I know from personal experience that it's difficult to argue with a Sarah because I live with one, but nevertheless, seems a bit out of character that he's willing to let that go and really doesn't voice any opposition whatsoever. And then we see another kind of paradox about Avraham. He comes now into a new city. He's experienced this before with Paro, and now he experiences with Abimelech, who abducts his wife. He engages in this semi-lie or half-truth, calling Sarah his sister. By the way, what was the whole dynamic there? How is that supposed to help him? If he says that this is my sister and Sarah is not married, it would seem like she would be even easier to take, someone to take her because she's unmarried. So the classic answer to this question is that the tradition was and remains this way, by the way, in many cultures, that in the absence of a father, the older brother, he is in charge and he sets the dowry. So according to this explanation, Avraham set an exorbitant dowry that he knew no one could meet. And that was his way of protecting Sarah. You want Sarah, you pay 1 million gold pieces for her. But what happens when a messenger comes and inquires about her and Avraham names the dowry? He says, no problem. I'm the messenger of Paro. He has all the money in the world. So whatever your price is, Sarah is beautiful. Sarah is someone that he wants. He'll pay whatever the dowry is. And so the plan doesn't work. It doesn't, the whole question why he tries to use it twice. And not only that, Yitzchak will also use the same argument in terms of protecting Rivka. But in any case, here Avimelech abducts Sarah, and Avraham, he doesn't say a word. He doesn't do anything. This is an Avraham that fought in last week's Parsha a world war, and he was a war hero. In this whole 5 kings versus 4 kings, Avraham comes out of it as being the one who turns the tide of war. So he is a warrior. And we don't know exactly the strength of Avimelech, but we can assume that if he would have put up a fight, it would have been a very, very strong battle that Avraham would have waged. And yet he submits and he doesn't say anything. Later on in the Parsha, we see the same Avimelech, although he really kind of should have learned his lesson, when they're arguing about the wells, he treats Abraham very shabbily, and he kind of forces Abraham to make this deal, something which Abraham actually is criticized by many of the commentators. And if one looks, and I turn there just for a moment, that at the end of the Parsha, he argues, sorry, not the end of the Parsha, but in the Parsha, they argue about the wells, and Abraham, kind of gets a raw deal and doesn't say anything. So the question is, why is he submitting so meekly when he is not that, we see he's not really that kind of a person? So I want to suggest that what seems clear from all this is that there are 2 Avrahams. There is the personal Avraham and there is the public Avraham. The personal Avraham, when things affect him on a personal level, he's gentle, he's submissive, he's willing to compromise. He often gives in even to his detriment, but he doesn't make a fuss. That's not that he doesn't necessarily like what's being done, but that's him on a personal level. But on a public level, Avraham is very different. When he is the Avraham, who is the Avhamon Goyim, as his name, remember, is changed to the father of many nations, he's a leader. He does not submit meekly. He rises up in a very, very adamant and forceful manner to do what he thinks is right. Because he's not only speaking about himself. This is not just something that affects him personally. This is something that has a much wider ramification. And so Abraham is much bolder. We see this quite interestingly when this same Avimelech calls him to account. And, Avimelech comes off like, yes, I was willing to take Sarah, but you mistreated me. You suspected me that I would have killed you had you said no. And do you really think that's the kind of person I am? Now, he comes off like he's been wronged, but clearly Avraham recognizes who he's dealing with. So he doesn't stand for that. When he's put on the spot and Avimelech says to him, what did you see that made you think that we would do something so horrible as killing you in order to get your wife/sister? We have laws in this town. We are a people of law and order and justice. Why do you think we would do that? But Avraham here is no shrinking violet. He doesn't say, sorry, Avimelech, I should have done something different. I apologize. He doesn't say that at all. He says to him, and this is a crucial phrase in the Torah. He says to him, right? Rak ein yirat Elokim b'makom hazeh. He says, I know that you have laws. I know that you are a society that, is not completely berserk and without a sense of justice. There's only one thing that's missing. And that's why the word rock here, sometimes in the Torah, the littlest word has the biggest meaning. So he says to him, yes, it's true. Everything you've tried to say. You're a decent person. You have laws on the books that protect citizens and that perhaps also protect visitors, unlike in Sodom, where visitors were mistreated. Rock. This is the rock and the hard place, so to speak. There's only one thing missing. Ein yirat Elokim b'makom hazeh. You don't have a baseline of belief and of law that indicates a fear of God. It's not a godly morality. It's a morality that you came up with on your own. It has no connection to yirat Elokim. And when you have a morality that is human made, is mortal made, and it doesn't stem from a religious Torah, godly baseline or fundamental understanding, anything can happen. He says, that's what I saw when I came here. And that's why I didn't trust you. And that's why I didn't tell the truth. Because as much as you pride yourself on being a leader of a community that upholds law and order, that's only as far as you determined it, but not something that has universal godly basis. And this is a lesson that Avraham is teaching us, that when societies make laws and they don't have yirat Elokim, they don't have a religious or godly baseline or backing behind it, anything can happen. I remember shortly after I came to Israel and I was, I volunteered, I was rabbi at the Merkaz Klita. There was a family that came from Holland. And this woman asked if she could see me privately. And I said, of course. She came to see me and she began to cry and said to me, I became religious later in life. And part of that was we decided to come and move to Israel. But before that, I was a nurse in a hospital in Holland, in Amsterdam. And she said, I need to ask you, how can I do tshuva for the fact that I was told to give fatal injections to dozens of patients in the hospital and kill them? That was the policy. And it was almost second nature. That's what you do. And if one looks at it, the laws dafka of the Netherlands, of Holland, very, very extreme when it comes to euthanasia and killing patients. And she said, I don't know how I can ever do tshuva for that. They had laws. They have laws. But when it serves their purpose, they decide, that's okay. You can kill people. We'll give it a fancy name. We'll find a rationale why it's good for society, why it's even best for the patient and the patient's family, and then we'll just kill you. Yirat Elokim wouldn't allow it, but that's another example. Rak ein yirat Elokim b'makom hazeh. And indeed, it's interesting to note that in the annals of the worst of the perpetrators of the Holocaust and those who assisted the Nazis are the Dutch. And I always make a point of this because the Dutch have gotten a free pass, along with the Ukrainians and along with the Lithuanians are the Dutch. The highest percentage of Jews murdered in Western Europe come from the Netherlands because there was an active, complicit collaboration between the Dutch and the Nazis. And therefore, there is this carryover from this kind of almost nonchalant willingness to kill people with euthanasia and participating in this crime of the Shoah. So Avraham is trying to teach us a lesson that really goes through history about be careful, even in societies that claim they have laws, if there's no Yirat Elokim. So these are the two Avrahams. When it's something that affects him and even his family, although of course he loves his family, but that's the personal Avraham. He's willing to go along, to compromise, to have faith. But when it comes to something of the public order, even the city of Sodom, Avraham is the great defender. And he stands up and he says, how can this happen? How can you let it happen? And he's willing to stand up to Avimelech. He was willing to fight in that war, whatever it takes. That's the public Avraham. And I would add that this idea of a dual personality is not unknown. Who else can you think of? You can write this in the chat. Who else can you think of that also had a kind of dual personality? Anybody perhaps have an answer to that? Who else do you see that reacts one way in certain circumstances and another way in other circumstances? Who is that? Anybody? I have to. You can even
Moshe
unmute
Rabbeinu.
if you want to say it. Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay, where do you see that about Moshe Rabbeinu?
He didn't stand up to his father-in-law about not giving a bris to
Okay.
his sons.
Okay. That can work as well. Yes. Thinking of somebody else. I was thinking of somebody else, and thank you. One second, who says that, because you gave me the right answer. And that was Tal. Thank you, Tal. And that was the idea of Yaakov and Yisrael. Yaakov gets a new name, Yisrael. And we have this question. We may deal with this more when we come to that Sedra. But the angel says, no more shall your name be called Yaakov, but Ki'im Yisrael, but Israel. And then right afterwards, it says, Vayomer Yaakov, Vayishal Yaakov. And we see Yaakov's name being used, right? So therefore, there are a lot of answers to this question. But one of the answers is, these are the two personalities. These are the two, you might say, nishamot, profiles, modes of this individual. On a personal level, he is Yaakov. But on a global level, on a universal level, he is Yisrael. That's why we are B'nai Yisrael and not B'nai Yaakov, because Yisrael represents, and there's been a study of this, it doesn't always work, but there are many times where the name Yisrael is used, where clearly it's being used in the context of the leader of the nation, as opposed to the individual person. And in a sense, that's how I guess all of us are. We have one mode of behavior when we're at home with our family. Of course, we always have a baseline, to be a good person and to follow the mitzvot, et cetera, et cetera. But the way in which sometimes we project and act may be different when we are in certain circumstances, when we are the personal individual, the private individual, as opposed to the public individual, then we might take on a kind of different persona. And I think that that's true about Yaakov and Yisrael. And I think, as we said, it might be true to some extent about Moshe and David HaMelech and others, but certainly it's true about Abraham. And this is why he seems to waffle or vacillate between the two, but he's not really. It really depends on the circumstance that he's in and who he feels he represents, and whether he should stand up and be, uh, you know, strong-minded and strong-willed and outspoken, and times when he's willing to be quiet and humble, depending on the situation. So that maybe is an example for all of us, um, that we have to always judge our situation and what is the proper way to react, and maybe follow that example and tailor the way in which we conduct ourselves based upon the situation in which we find ourselves. So I wish all of you, I want to again say that we express condolences and also wishes for nechama for the family of the Goldsteins and the Horowitzes, and also an aliyat neshama for Avraham Yaakov ben Shimon as well. So if anybody wants to add a comment or two, you're welcome to unmute yourself and feel free to do so. Yes, Van.
Weiss, when that woman came to you and asked you from Holland how she could do Shiva, what did you say?
Well, look, I told her